Wake up, Collins. Sarge's gruff voice roused me from my sleep, making me shake the exhaustion from my bones. The AR was still resting on my knee, hand around the grip and at the ready. Prisoners coming in. We're making the jump soon. This was the third jump I've been on this month, and it was getting exhausting. Ever been molecularized through a teleporter through space? Yeah, not a fun experience. Not to mention having to stay for a few days in Cerberus is going to be a bitch. The gravity change alone is going to wreak havoc on my stomach. We've got a big one today. The Sarge stood at the front of the briefing room, looking us all down. Real goddamn monster. The Blackwater Ripper killed 70 people in the span of one night. A picture flashed up on the screen. Just a scrawny little guy, bags under his eyes. Didn't look like he could hurt a store mannequin, much less 70 people in one night. Oh shit, I heard about this guy, Perkins said from another seat. His eyes narrow, looking closer at the picture of the man. Asshole looks like he never left his basement. Yeah, you would think. 70 people with their insides shredded say otherwise. Almost half of them kids. This damn monster went on a killing spree at a birthday first, then made his way through most of the neighborhood he lived in. All ripped out, like a damn animal was eating them. Sarge continued, shouting and red-faced. Wasn't often that we got a transfer that riled him up, but this guy touched a nerve. Thought they said it was a shooting? Matthew asked, but Sarge shook his head. No, they were torn apart. Called it a shooting to keep the public from going crazy with the details. Sarge was more on edge, with a steel in his voice that I had only heard in the most tense situations. Hey Sarge, you're awfully pissed about this guy. Perkins spoke up, noticing just as I did. Sarge shook his head, looking down for a moment. That happened back home. I knew some of those people. Went to school with them. Seeing those crime scene photos is one of the few things that's gonna haunt me, he said, before composing himself once more. Alright, they're bringing him in now. We've got a quick jump up there, then a 24-hour security hold to make sure he doesn't just croak when he goes through the diffusion. Would that really be so bad? Matthews asked, from his corner of the room. He was leaning forward, gone off leaning against the wall. Eyebrows raised. He just shrugged his shoulders when Sarge glared at him. Just saying, an airlock wouldn't cost as many taxpayer dollars. I want to as much as the next person, but we're sworn to our duty. You know with your clearance, we can't just do that kind of shit. Sarge replied. Even the dumbass president doesn't know we exist. You think someone's gonna be mad for murking a murderer? Perkins spoke again, chuckling. Another glare shut him down, but he was still breathing out of his nose, laughing to himself. Collins, I want you and Matthews on rear guard. Standard formation. We're going to 2x2 system. Me and Perkins first, then the perp, then you two. From there, you know the walk toward the main facility. All the standard shit. Just another routine transfer as far as we're concerned. Sarge finished his orders, looking at all of us for confirmation that we understood. Yes, sir. All echoed at once as we filed out of the room, toward the transport station. The prisoner was standing by the door, chains on hands and feet. Nobody knew what the hell he could do, or how he did the murders apparently. I heard the story on the news, but there wasn't any way someone this scrawny could have done it. Philip Kent, Sarge said, stiff but loud, so the little man heard. He jumped, frightened by the loud voice as his glasses almost fell off. Brown hair, shaggy down to his neck almost, with a massive pair of old Coke bottle glasses. The guy looked like a Dahmer for the new age. You understand that you have been waived trial rights due to the nature of your crimes? Please, where are we? I don't even know what I did. He was almost in tears, begging and pleading. The bags under his eyes were more exacerbated than the pictures, and the eyes themselves were almost bloodshot. I just woke up in blood. I don't know how I got there. They told me I kill people, but I couldn't kill people. I wouldn't. Please, you believe me, right? Shut up. Do you understand that you will be effectively a dead man when it comes to any record of your life? You as a person no longer exist. Sarge continued. Everything from here on out is off the books, does not exist. And that includes you. You are being transferred to Cerberus, where you'll be locked in and promptly forgotten by the rest of the world. At this point, he was just streaming tears, close to falling to his knees. I started to feel sorry for him, but then remembered what Sarge had said about those people he killed. There was something this guy was hiding behind this pitiful act. Sarge pushed Kent into the diffusion room, where 2 techs stood on standby in front of a console. Sarge situated Kent in the 3rd silver pot on the wall, sealing it shut while the prisoner just kept crying. Then, Sarge climbed into the 1st, while Perkins took his spot in the 2nd. Matthews and I climbed into the last 2 on the other side of Kent. Diffusion initializing, one of the techs said through a small speaker in the tube. It was cramped, with only the small window to see outside through. I took a deep breath, knowing it could be a couple of minutes before it sent me up. The silver they used to make the pots smelled like an old jewelry store, making me think of times when I didn't know a secret government prison was on the fucking moon. All I could do was sigh though. These things might be cutting-edge tech, but the transfer rate is slow and has to be done one by one so we don't fuse or some crazy science mumbo-jumbo. I fell asleep during the presentation on it. I closed my eyes, letting myself forget I was in a tube about to get broken down to a genetic level and sent through space. When they told me I was getting a promotion from being in Spec Ops for so long, telling me that it was an easy, cushy job with very little work, they really should have elaborated. Would have been nice to know ahead of time if it involved teleporting to the moon. Collins, you're up. The voice came again. I felt the lights go down and saw the darkness creep in. The feeling started from down in my toes first, everything coming apart as I broke down. It was an odd sensation, kinda like when a limb falls asleep. Everything started coming back together, even as I felt my consciousness drifting through space toward the moon. I felt the weightlessness take a hold for a moment, and then I was grounded again, though a little bit lighter than before. My gun was still firmly at my side, with nothing out of place. I made these jumps dozens of times, but it still felt really odd to go through this. Go back! I heard the scream before I could see the scene outside of my pot window. Crimson was everywhere, even across the plexiglass that covered my own pot opening. There were sprays of blood, and through the corner I could see a body. Blood was pulled in all around them, and there was way more than any one human body could hold. Get the hell out of here, damn it! Tell them to stop sending people! The blood sprayed again, before I could hear a gunshot followed by a massive guttural roar. I saw Sarge backing up toward my pot, holding onto his pistol while aiming at some massive creature moving closer toward him. I could see the blood shimmering off of it in the reflected sunlight of the moon as it stalked closer, Sarge firing off more bullets as it did. Nothing seemed to work, and he just kept coming. Sir, I'm not going to leave you here. What happened? I screamed through the window. He grunted back, firing again, but this time at the thing's feet. There wasn't any sign it had an effect, and the creature just kept coming towards us with no regard. The other tube finally beeped, and I could see the door open while Matthews stepped out. The hell, Sarge? He said, before the thing grabbed him, biting hard on his neck. I had to do something, so popped open my door and hefted the rifle to my shoulders, aiming straight for the thing's head. A 3-round burst flew out of the chamber but bounced off and pinged at the floor after hitting the thing's skull. I could see it more clearly now, fur matted with blood from the techs. Perkins was lying in a corner, hand to his neck as it was oozing blood. He was still alive, but there was no way he was fighting. Matthews was in the same spot now, with a gaping wound in his neck. Perkins started to stand up as Sarge shouted him down. Stop before you bleed out, idiot! Sarge fired more rounds into the beast, again bouncing off without harm. Its eyes were glowing red, with fangs dripping blood in the moonlight. I stepped back, not sure what to do, when Perkins began to change. It looked like he started seizing, but after a moment, fur began to sprout. He screamed in anguish, face contorting as something happened. The bones in his face looked like they were breaking and reforming, reconnecting into some new creature. The teeth in his mouth grew to massive fangs, bones bursting forth from his fingertips into sharp claws. I could see Matthews beginning to undergo the same thing. "Run!" Sarge shouted at me, pushing me toward the main corridor to the prison. "Get the hell out of here! Hide!" We began to run through the tunnel, only the occasional fluorescent light every few feet to light the way. Plexiglass windows, thick to keep up from depressurizing, gave a view of the rocky moon's surface outside. The earth sat far from the horizon, like a distant dream of safety. The blue water looked like the safest place in the universe, but the moon was thousands of miles away from any body of water. I could tell Sarge was hurt, limping as we ran. A fucker cut my ankle when I unlocked his spot. Don't know what the fuck happened, but soon as he was up here, shit went south. He grumbled as we kept our pace down the tunnel. The airlock was ahead, a guard standing behind it, waiting for us to reach them. The look of surprise on their face told me they weren't prepared for anything that was about to go down. "Open the damn door!" The man scrambled, hitting the button to let us through. The noises behind us were unworldly, like howls from the jaws of hell. They were getting closer, rounding the curve right along a blood trail left by Sarge. We got through the door, repeatedly mashing the buttons to close it before turning around and hefting my gun. "No, hide. This thing isn't something we can just fight off," Sarge said, ushering me toward one of the large storage lockers in the corner. I opened the door, flinging things to the side and stepping in before closing it. I tried to keep my gun where it could be aimed and shot immediately, but there wasn't any guarantee it would happen fast enough to save us. "I'm going to lead them away. Once they're gone, you two go back to the teleporter." "The fuck is happening down there?" A yell came from the upper part of the base, where the cells were lined up above. The other guards must have been in the monitoring station on the other side. "Get the warden!" The airlock guard shouted back. A clamor rose up among the cells above, most with the resounding sentiment of, "Fuck the warden." "Jackasses. I don't have a radio. I'm going to run and notify the others." "No. Best you can do is barricade until everyone can get to the pods. These things ain't hit by regular bullets," I said, still watching them through the locker slats. The beasts finally reached the door, slamming against it with tremendous force. I'm surprised it didn't give then and there, and they kept slamming through it. "Sarge, what are we going to do?" "Fuck, alright. You go warn the others to barricade themselves. Collins, once they're past here and you can get out, go back to the pods and get a message back home," he said, backing toward the next hallway as the airlock guard took off running down it. "You get out of here. That's an order." "Yes, sir," I said, keeping my eyes trained on him as the plexiglass finally gave a resounding crunch. The entire glass shattered, leaving massive shards everywhere on the floor. The three came through, Perkins and Matthews, now both hulking beasts, just like Kent became. "Come on, bastards," Sarge said, firing off a shot at one and leading them into the hall. They kept running after him, gaining quick as he limped. Prisoners along both levels in the hall started shouting, some screaming in fear. The beasts seemed to have gotten distracted by the new canned food all around them, because one turned to the nearest cell right through the door, reaching through to grab the inmate inside before he could move back far enough. Crimson bloomed forth on the white prison jumpsuit, and the man fell back screaming in terror as the beast again pulled him toward their jowls. Their snout was narrow enough to get through the bars, biting the man inside. I had to put a hand over my mouth as they began making their way, the newest bitten now turning like the rest. The howling just kept growing as they increased their numbers, and I could hear useless gunshots going off over the chaos. We'll be lucky if someone doesn't break a hole in the pressurized system. Then again, it may be a mercy if all of us are just sucked into the vacuum of space, never to speak of what happened here. When the coast finally seemed clear, or clear enough where I could get through without being seen, I slowly made my way out of the locker, making sure to keep my head on a swivel for any beasts that may be lurking in wait. Nothing I could see, so I started off down the corridor, making my way back to the pot bay. The blood trails were still fresh, and the three had only sprayed more around during their rush after us. I finally got to the pot room to see the floor almost completely covered in blood in the crumpled space. It took me a moment, but once my footsteps from the hall stopped echoing, I could hear muffled breathing. "Oh my god, is someone alive in here?" I said, trying not to be too loud just in case. Suddenly, a head popped up from behind the tech station, fur and snout covered in fresh blood from a corpse on the floor. They must not have turned immediately like the others. Shit. I tried my best to duck, barely managing to sidestep it but slipping in the blood. I somehow kept on my feet, making my way over to one of the pots. If I could get behind the pots, there may be a chance it's too big to get back there. At least I'll be safe until someone else gets here. Lunging through, I made my way in just as the beast reached an arm between two of the pots to grab me. Instead, it got stuck, too big to fit through. The creature screamed in agony, and I could see smoke rising from the arm that was stuck. "Holy shit," I said. Of course. The pots were made with an outer shell of silver because they conduct 100% electricity. Something about keeping the tech safe from the energy diffusion going on inside. All I could think of were those old Wolfman movies I watched as a kid though. It always took a silver bullet to kill a werewolf, but nobody said it had to be a bullet, right? I shot my pistol at one of the electrical tubes running from the last pot. It would put us down one for escape, but if I'm right, we can fuck these guys up and get home. The tube severed at the bullet, and I tore it off the rest of the way. The beast was standing back, studying the pots like it was trying to figure out how to get through without injury. Slowly I made my way back toward the first pot, hoping it would mirror me. It did. Okay, I whispered to myself, finally going past the last pot before quickly tucking back in as it lunged. Instead, I stuck the sharp end of the tube out, catching the beast right in the chest. It let out a final ragged howl before slowly shrinking, turning human again before letting out its last breath. Holy shit, it worked. "Collins?" Sarge's voice again, coming down the corridor back to us. He fired off a couple of shots behind him and shouted ahead. "If you're in there, you better be ready." Sir, they're werewolves." I met him at the door, brandishing the tube so he could see. "Silver kills them. Look." He looked at the dead body on the ground, snatching the tube from me before pushing me backward into the first pot, the door still open from when he got out just minutes ago. Before I could protest, he shut the door, securing the pressure lock from the outside. "That means they can't get out of here," he said, running over to the console and slipping on the blood, using the momentum to swing around. I beat at the window on my pot, screaming at him to let me out. "Get home. Tell them don't come back up here. I'm destroying this thing." "No, sir. It's just the moon. They'll turn back." I was shouting at him over the comm speaker. He just shook his head. "It's over on, Collins. We're the only humans here now. Only ones with any way out anyway," he said, hitting buttons on the console and starting the diffusion sequence. The beasts were howling loud again, coming down the corridor after Sarge. I set a fire back there, hoping it would keep them busy. Guess that was wishful thinking. "Get in! You can't just stay here!" I shouted. Sarge smiled through at me, throwing down the rifle he was still carrying along with the silver tube. Instead, he reached onto his back, holding up a grenade. I could feel my limbs turning tingly, things beginning to break down as I was being transferred through space. The last image I got of him was a flood of fur and blood coming through the door. Fangs tore into the Sarge as he smiled at me, pulling the pin and backing into the wall. My vision began to black out, phasing between up here and back on Earth. I could see the wall where Sarge was standing suddenly splatter red with blood, not exploding like he probably hoped. The next thing I knew, I was on my hands and knees, barfing back on Earth. The pod techs were horrified, afraid to touch me because of all the blood. They took me for questioning, But all I could tell them was to watch the feeds. As far as they can see, everything is still functioning. But the beasts are now just aimlessly wandering the halls. They said some people are still up there, but I think they're just going to leave them. There's no way anyone is going back up there, and Sarge did enough damage to the diffusion console that it won't work on that end. I think they're going to discharge me. Probably a nice pension somewhere out on the coast. I'm definitely taking any kind of retirement they throw my way. They at least owe it to me. After that. I work at the Lone Star Diner off the road from Carson City to Reno. Diner name has of course been changed for obvious reasons. More on that later. Why do I work at the Lone Star Diner off the road from Carson City to Reno? Well, because, kind stranger, my life plans didn't work out. Generally, if you're caught working at a diner past college, specifically one in the middle of nowhere, it might mean that things weren't going so hot. But still, why this diner? Why Lone Star specifically? I am aware you probably aren't actually asking these questions, but I nonetheless believe they deserve a response. Of all of the diners in the world, what makes Lone Star so special is the pay. The pay is fucking great. There are maybe 10 other diners within a 30-minute drive from where I live. Most of them average out to a little over minimum wage. Meanwhile, Lone Star is whipping up a mean $50 per hour. And that hourly rate is due to one single, solitary reason, no matter what anyone tells you. Because of him. My first day on the job was fine, more or less. I'd worked customer service before, so I felt like I could run with the strange surprises that came unique to diners. I was able to adapt to the inconsistency of the rules pretty quickly. Unwritten rules like some areas in the restaurant need to be spotless at all times. Others, boss lady couldn't give less of a shit about. Serve customers quickly, but not too quickly, asshole. Customers here don't like it when you show up too fast. Give them some time to feel the floor under their boots, to miserably stare ahead and mourn what could have been. You know, diner stuff. They're here because they want to be alone. Pardon the contradiction. Of course, vaguely defined, whispered only by ghosts, rules extended to the cooks as well. If you were somehow secretly celebrity chef Marco Pierre White in the flesh, your mandate was to keep your damn prowess to yourself. Your job is to make the classics as decently as possible. Not bad, but not amazing. Just poor enough to be really good. That's what the customers are here for. As the weeks unfolded, I rose, or I suppose crouched, to the occasion quite well. You want intentional pinpoint precision mediocrity? You've come to the right person. Most of the patrons just wanted coffee and brunch. Brought them at medium speed with a semi-predictable cadence of waiter or waitress check-ins afterwards. Done, done, and done. Not one for subtlety. One day, I finally decided to ask my boss the question in the middle of a shift. I didn't want to ruin a good thing by doubting it, but fuck me if I wasn't a little curious. Not a full look at the gift horse's mouth. More of a skeptical side-eye. Why $50 an hour? She didn't even look up from her task at the register, methodically counting out bills. Said it on your first day. You gotta be good at following the rules. And when it's an important rule, you'd better be damn well perfect. High expectations here. I made a face. Right. High expectations. You think I'm joking? No, ma'am. I guess I just... Why did I even speak up? I just think you're running a really cool operation here. Cooler than you might realize. It's still work, but the whole thing seems... fair. Christ, my waffling skills were abysmal. Add that to the list of intentional mediocrity. Booyah. She looked up from her duties and shot me a stern look. I don't run this ship, and following the rules here means that you take care of yourself. I'm sorry? I am your employer, sure, and I'll pay you well to be here, sure, but you should be aware there is plenty more going on here than just you and this diner. She glanced down at her watch, then sighed. I usually save this speech for the end of the month, but you already caught me halfway through it. So, the Cole's notes. If you don't think you have it in you to follow instructions clearly, without protest, and without asking too many questions, then you should leave. Quit. No harm, no foul. A week's worth of pay on the house. The conversation sputtered shortly after that. I tried to find an opening to ask more about what she meant, but she was closed off to the topic moving forward. And you know what? That was fine. If she wanted me to put my head down and just do the work, I could do that. And work I did. And things were good. Mundane small talk with the customers was fun. My coworkers were friendly, and I was getting paid well. I'd found a place to park the failures of my life. A place to build from. It must have been a Saturday, I think, when I first noticed him. An occupied seat in the far corner of the diner. No idea how long he'd been sitting there and waiting, though he certainly looked patient. I had the strange inkling that he'd been left hanging for quite some time, though I couldn't actually remember seeing him enter. Brown, corduroy shirt, short hair, mid-50s it seemed, a reasonably calm smile, normal-looking dude. I started making my way out from the back and headed towards him. Immediately, I felt a tight grip on my arm. It was Melanie, my boss, with a forceful clutch, enough to make me drop my notepad. Her fingers tightened around my forearm, sharply pinching my skin. "Important rules," she said. "What? You remember our chat about rules? Well, this is the most important one, okay?" "Okay?" "That man over there in the corner." She motioned to the man who had caught my attention, sitting upright, hands softly clasped together, coy smile across his face. "You don't go up to him. You don't say a word to him." "But he's a customer." Her hold intensified. She was hurting me, almost as if she was taking out some sort of unseen anger on me. "I'd like to ask you right now to be smart enough to not ask questions and just follow instructions. You don't go to his table. You don't talk to him. You can look at him. You can shout across the room at him if you'd like, though I can't imagine why you'd ever need to do that. But you do not approach him, and you do not take his order." "Or?" A sharp exhale through the nose, a shake of the head, and a glare from my manager. "It's different every time, but it ain't pretty." I watched him from the short distance I'd been offered. It was hard not to. She did too. Unlike the other customers here, I didn't get a sense that he was here to be alone, to reminisce, or to take part in the comfort ritual of a lackluster Eggs Benedict over rye. Instead, I had the sense that he was just curious, mild-mannered, content, but curious. My shift ended not too long after, so I didn't actually get a chance to watch him leave. Regardless, the experience of seeing him and learning about the rule he was connected to left a bizarre, dampening feeling on my mood. I liked my job. I liked coming home and unwinding. I didn't mind being in the middle of nowhere. It felt nice to look up at the empty sky filled with stars, to see them shimmer and shine, and even occasionally shoot across. I made a wish that things in my life would stay simple. I started to get a sense of his cadence. He'd usually show up once a month. The rare times I got to see him, I'd try to squeak in the odd question to my boss. Questions like, who is he? Where does he come from? And, has anyone spoken with him? All mechanically met with, I don't know. And, if you're scared, you're welcome to quit. Then, as fate would have it, one day, Boss Lady fell incredibly ill. My co-workers and I had to convince her to go home midway through her shift, her sickness falling uncomfortably within the usual 1 to 3 day window at the end of the month, when our customer would typically appear. And of course, there he was, right after she went home. To my benefit, The other waiters and waitresses working the rounds were well aware of his presence and knew exactly what to do whenever he arrived. All of them knew to steer clear of him. Nevertheless, driven by a foundational curiosity that I just couldn't shake, I used this opportunity to go for it. I shouted a single thing across the floor, knowing Melanie wasn't there to chide me. "Hello, sir? What brings you here?" I asked him. He turned his head from his fixed position in his seat and put a hand to his ear. Clever. "I said, what brings you here?" I called out again, a few notches louder this time, garnering some odd looks from our Thursday patrons. To my surprise, he spoke back. I'm not sure why I was expecting his voice to carry the tone of some twisted, demented demon. Maybe the fear Melanie had instilled in me? The man sounded exactly how he looked. "I'm sorry, dear," he said. "I'm afraid I'm not sure what you're saying. Can you come over and ask me again?" "Nope. I was good." "And I don't mean to be rude about the service," he continued, "but it feels like no one has taken my order for quite some time now." I let the exchange end there, diverting my attention back to the other guests. As always, he'd eventually disappear without fanfare, without the clatter of the entrance bell or any sight or sound of his steps across the diner floor. Our backroom conversations about him remaining dreadfully short while he was there. Just, he's here, and he's gone. And the odd, when we really needed to say it. I feel weird about this. It took me a while to understand where my brazenness to address this strange middle-aged man came from. In truth, I was just afraid. His presence and all of the questions tied to his being at our diner were disrupting this otherwise great arrangement that I felt I had. It seemed right, in the moment, to stand at the very edge of my bravery and say something to him. Of course, now that he was gone, I just felt worse. The next week, I was invited to something pretty interesting at work. I generally have a good amount of visibility into what Melanie, boss lady, does on a daily basis. The only element that remained elusive was her bi-weekly check-in with a particularly sharp-dressed, agent-looking fella. There was a pretty consistent presence of state troopers, agents, and similarly uniformed men and women dropping into the diner, though I seldom paid it mind beyond simply noticing it. Midway through wiping down the tables, only an hour or so into my shift, Mel swung by and said, "Hey, want you in the meeting with the big boss, if you have a few." "The big boss?" Sure, yeah, coming. Just, if you don't mind me asking, who is?" She let her eyes speak her unwritten rules to me. Questions equals generally bad. "Thank you for the reminder, ma'am." We maneuvered to a back room and sat at a table. Across from us, already seated, was a man in a sharply tailored suit with a subtle earpiece in. The aforementioned agent. The table was littered with a small, messy stack of notes, papers, and documents. He made it a point to size me up, staring me down uninterrupted, like a deer to headlights. No concern at all about how awkward he was making it for me. Then, he turned to Melanie. "How long has she been here?" he asked her in his gruff western drawl. 6 months, she said. "You trust her?" "I trust her, yes." He let his eyebrow say, "If you say so," then went on with it. "All right, so, apparently, you had a visit from the wandering man last week." "You," he said, motioning to Melanie, "were out. But you," attention now shifted to me, "weren't. Give me the lowdown." "The wandering man?" The agent caught the confusion in my eyes. "Jesus, you've told this girl nothing, haven't you?" he said to Melanie. "Sir, I know it sounds weird," she said, "but I personally feel as if the man is almost, I don't know, drawn to curiosity. Like, maybe the less I say to those not already in the know, the bad wandering man." The agent cut her off. is our nickname for the fella that sits in the corner of your fine little establishment. Or should I say, the state's fine little establishment. I'm sorry? I asked. That's correct. The state's. Congratulations, ma'am. You're part of a government operation. The Wandering Man, not just a cutesy little nickname, but our legal definition of this tricky little problem, is a phenomenon we discovered many years ago. At the time, he just walked the desert landscape, chatting up unsuspecting strangers with bizarre questions. Everything fine, all hunky-dory. A little weird, sure, but nothing illegal. However, sometimes things would happen because of him. Bizarre things, grisly things. I could see Melanie groaning, concerned at the picture being painted. Would this pique my curiosity? Have you guys, taken him in for? I almost wanted to cut off my own stupid question, but he ran with it. Nope, not because we don't want to, but rather because it might not be safe. The cozy mental image I'd held of this diner was starting to fracture. We have a reason to believe that he's a visitor, he said. From? I didn't attend another debrief after that. Not because I was barred, mind you. Rather, I just didn't want to know anymore. My gut no longer held curiosity. There was just a low, aching dread there now. The agents and troopers, spaced out and seated amongst the eatery, were now just a reminder of what my dingy diner job really was. The government cavalry would mostly show up around the end of the month window the Wandering Man was set to arrive in. When he'd appear, they wouldn't do much more than examine him from their distant tables, subtly scribbling notes into notebooks. He'd always act the same. He would just sit there. He wouldn't give them, or us, the diner employees, much to go on. Speaking of employees, I remembered something Melanie told me after my first month of working here, that the worker turnover at this diner was incredibly high. Knowing at the time what everyone got paid, it made absolutely no sense to me. Now, 5 months into the gig, alongside a completely new set of cooks, waiters, and waitresses from when I'd first started, I'd seen firsthand just how true her statement was. None of the leavers claimed as much, but I'm sure the underlying premise of who the diner was really for became subconsciously clear to them during their time here, and it probably didn't sit all too well with them. I stayed, but not because of the pay. I'm actually not sure why I did. We had a new cast of rookie employees now. The ones who understood the vague terms of the situation, just as Melanie, I, and all former employees did, stuck around. Those who couldn't reconcile the situation with their inherent curiosity naturally filtered out. And then, there was Malcolm. It was only his first week. He was a keener, mega keener. He'd bulldozed through a giant list of tasks and was already asking for the next batch of work to chew through. Anything he could get ahead of, anything he could step in for, anything he could learn, he was on it. He wanted to be as helpful as humanly possible. I think the salary of the role for a guy his young age was just too alluring for him. For our part, Melanie and I tried our best to get him to pace himself. We were both giving him the spiel now. By this point, we'd more or less perfected it. There are things about this diner that are strange, rules you will have to follow and not think about. Rules that are concrete, immutable, and non-negotiable, like gravity. He nodded. At that moment, I really believed he was internalizing my words. And if that doesn't work for you, and if you don't think you can take care of yourself, then you shouldn't work here. I continued. There was always a visceral feeling in my stomach whenever I saw the Wandering Man in the corner during the same week that we were onboarding new staff. I'm sure Melanie felt it too. On those days, Mel and I would both work the till, and if we saw anyone coming out from the back, we'd stop them with a simple grab of the arm. Malcolm stepped out, and I did just that, a rough grasp of his forearm, just like Melanie had done to me when I first started. He recoiled in surprise. "Remember that little chat about rules we just had?" I said. He nodded meekly, as if he was already in trouble. I pointed to the man seated at the far table in the brown corduroy shirt, staring straight ahead, with what I believed at the time no real reason to be here. And I said, "You will not, under any conditions, serve that man. Don't go up to him. Don't talk to him. Pretend he doesn't exist." Malcolm lifted the garbage bag he had been holding in his hand. In my nervousness, I hadn't actually clocked what he was stepping out for. "Just doing garbage duty, ma'am," he said, but understood. And then he left out the front door with his usual swagger. The dumpster wasn't as close as we would have liked it, so I appreciated his willingness to take on this duty so soon into his employment. I turned back to observe the wandering man. We had a crowd of agents in attendance that day, scattered about the restaurant. The man wasn't one to speak up often. Today was an interesting exception. "Officers," he said, "if you have any questions, feel free to join me at the table to ask them." The agents around the room reacted, mainly with snickers. "Seriously, if you come sit with me, I'll be happy to spill it all. Truly." Even more laughs, but no one bit. And yet, he continued, pointedly, "I know you're curious. I know you take notes. I know you talk about me. I know you built this establishment for me. I know you." As I reconciled the fact that this was the most words I'd ever heard him string together in succession, I heard the chime of the bell. A door had opened. Malcolm was dusting his hands as he entered through the diner's side door. A door which was situated right beside the table the wandering man was seated at. It all happened so fast. And yet, it played out in front of me excruciatingly slowly. As if there was a moment, a single solitary second, where I could have stepped in. The wandering man dropped any pretext of an exchange with the agents, stopping his sentence midway and adopting a completely new demeanor. He played the role of a low, miserable, tired man and said, 30 visits, terrible service every time," in a pathetic tone, just as Malcolm walked by. Malcolm instinctively plucked a notepad out from his chest pocket and turned his head to face the man. "Hey, I got you, Chief. I can have him ring something up for you. What are you?" And then, Malcolm froze in place, and the wandering man's expression turned Cheshire Cat white. His neck alternated between tensing and fluttering with what seemed to be undeniable excitement. The men started getting up from the table, and then, immediately, both of them were gone. Malcolm and the Wanderer had vanished out of existence entirely. The insanity of the moment was interrupted by the coded language I heard blared over a megaphone, nonsensical agent speak that has been seared into my memory forever. "Alert! Level black. Wandering target has compromised a civilian. I repeat, civilian has been compromised." And that was that. Melanie quit in the days after. She wasn't mad at me. She told me she always knew she'd leave after the 10th disappearance. Why that specific milestone was required, I have no clue. All I could do from that point was continue to work. On my commutes home or during lunch breaks, I would look up at the stars and put out the wish that Malcolm be brought back home. Back from wherever he'd been taken. The debrief with the agents brought me no solace. The exchange with them was simple and short. "Where was he taken to?" Answered with, "He's gone now." With a perpetual dagger in my soul now, I had only the smallest of silver linings, if you can even call it that. A lesson. The lesson that I needed to be even more watchful, even more diligent. And on days when the wandering man was visiting, the only server at the diner, no exceptions. I knew the agents weren't happy about that. None of them said it to me explicitly, but I could tell that they would learn something new about him every time he whisked someone away after a mistake was made. It was a weird, Darwinian setup they had created. We were a zoo they could use to learn more about a specific animal, a specific entity, a specific visitor. No dice. They'd just have to watch him sit now, or wait for him to do something different. I waited for the 3-day stretch at the end of the month that he usually appears in. Things were quiet up until that point. When he finally showed up, it wasn't what I expected. For the first time ever, I saw the wandering man walk right through the front door, in the dead of night, at the tail end of my shift. I was at the till, paralyzed, as he took step after step to close the distance. And then, he was right there, standing in front of me, and I was sure, absolutely sure, that I was going to die. He smiled. "Don't worry, I have my own little set of rules I play by," he said. I didn't say a word. This was no man's land right now. "I know you've been curious about me. I've admired it from the moment you first spoke up to address me. Cautious curiosity is a great thing to see in someone, especially in such a reckless species. Please just go. I'd like to answer a question about why I'm visiting. I'm sure you'd like to know why I'm here, right?" "I'm not curious anymore. I swear I'm not." He laughed. "The answer is really painfully simple. This little game, this little charade I'm playing, it is just so unbelievably fun. Please don't kill me. Please. You truly have a wonderful planet. I will return again soon. Promise. Give me a month. Maybe 2 this time." A sincere, kind smile delivered with kind eyes. "I'll come back with a new game." And then, he was gone. It took me a minute to realize that there was a cake box sitting on the counter beside me. Maybe it was there the whole time he was speaking to me. Maybe it materialized right after he left. I opened the box to find Malcolm's severed head, a blank expression on his face, sitting on a bed of poorly and confusingly organized flowers, almost as if there was an intention to create a floral arrangement, but no understanding of what something like that would look like. On top of the horrific display, written in an almost childlike handwriting, was a note that read, "I brought him back, just like you wished." The worst thing about being trapped at a diner in the middle of nowhere is that you realize that there really is nowhere else to run to. Every single part of our planet is blanketed by stars, by open sky. Someone could drop in anytime. My older brother Shane had spent the last 10 years in prison, and it looked like he might be in there for the rest of his life. However, he called me recently to say that they were opening up a new early release program, and they would let him out immediately on a probationary period if he agreed to participate. Some sort of new process, an ethical alteration to prevent future criminal activity. God, how I wish now that he had just told him no. Growing up, Shane was my hero. My mom has had a rough life. She got pregnant with Shane when she was 16, and her parents kicked her out of the house for it. Afterwards, she went to live with Shane's father, who was in his early 20s and had a small apartment in the worst part of the city. And he treated her terribly, forcing her to drop out of school and get several jobs so he could spend the majority of his time drinking and partying, hitting her whenever she stepped out of line. But she was terrified of raising a baby alone. She tried her best to make it work with him, but it just wasn't enough. When she started showing, he realized that he didn't want to be a dad and kicked her out too. Faced with the prospect of living on the streets, she lied about her age and managed to secure a lease from a landlord in a nearby building that preferred not to ask questions as long as she paid the rent. When Shane was born, she did her best. As she was only 17 and without an education beyond the 10th grade, she continued to work multiple minimum wage jobs and didn't have much time to spend with her new son. Until he was around 6, Shane mostly stayed with an older widow, Roberta, that lived across the hall from them and was sympathetic to their situation. Then, Roberta died, and Mom decided that Shane was old enough to just stay home alone while she was working, or increasingly, staying out late with friends or on dates. Mom fell hard into drugs and drinking to cope with her situation, and took comfort in the worst men. None of them ever stuck around for more than a few months. But even still, many of them left their marks on my mother and on Shane. Coming of age in this environment of loneliness, poverty, and violence, Shane was a troubled child. He was constantly in detention at school, getting in fights with other kids, stealing, and generally raising hell around the neighborhood. That is, until I came along. One of Mom's short-lived flings resulted in her second pregnancy, another boy, and I was born a little over 2 months after Shane's 12th birthday. Seeing that she wasn't going to change her ways overnight and become Mother of the Year, he took it upon himself to be my primary parental figure. He changed my diapers, did the weekly shopping, fed me, bathed me, cooked, cleaned. He did everything that he could to make my childhood better than his had been. It became his mission in life to be the father that neither of us ever had. At school, he opened up a little bootleg shop out of his locker, where he'd sell candy, trading cards, snacks, and once he was in high school, cigarettes and liquor, just to make a little extra money to buy me clothes and toys. And then, when he turned 16, he took a job at a local auto shop working on cars in the evenings after classes to help pay the rent and our other bills. I never understood where he found the energy to do it all. It was around this time that I started school myself. He packed my lunch every day and made sure that I got on the bus in the morning. With his supplemental income, Mom was able to quit one of her jobs to be home to get me off the bus at the end of the day and to make dinner at night. Now, I'm not sure if he said something to her, or if it was just her seeing him picking up so much of her slack. But she began to sober up a little and made more of an effort to be a mother to me than she had with him. It was too late for her to repair much of her relationship with Shane, but I began not to dread the time I had to spend alone with her. After he graduated, Shane went to work full-time as a mechanic in the shop and started making decent money. With his grades, he could have gone to college, moved away and studied something interesting, made something of himself. But it wasn't even a thought in his mind. His dream was for me to go to college, for me to grow up and do something important. All he wanted to do was save up enough money that he could buy us a small place out in the suburbs and put me through school. So, he continued to work his ass off, and Mom picked up some hours too. They both put money away each month into our future fund, and I ended up having a largely normal childhood while we counted down the days until we could get out of our crappy apartment. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and that was enough. And just when it looked like we were finally going to be able to make it happen, something terrible happened. When I was 14, Shane got arrested. He was always looking for opportunities to make extra cash, to help us save up faster and start our new life. And his boss, Mr. Franks, would give him side work sometimes. Mostly, this involved him driving one of the cars from the shop and dropping off or picking up a package here and there. He never knew what was in these packages, nor did he care to ask, but he was always well compensated for his efforts. Then, one night, Mr. Franks told him that he had a slightly different assignment. Shane was to drive an associate of Mr. Frank's to a house, drop him off, wait for him to come back out, and then take him right back to where he picked him up originally. That was all the information Shane had, but it seemed like a simple enough task, and he would be making double his normal fee for doing it. So, he agreed. Things went alright for the first half of the evening. Shane picked up Mr. Franks' friend at the address Mr. Frank supplied, and the man gave him directions on where to go next. They didn't speak beyond him grunting, "Go left here, right here, take the next exit," at Shane every so often, and they never exchanged names. It was a little over an hour before he directed Shane to kill the headlights and pull into the driveway of a home well outside the city. The man gave him strict instructions to stay inside the vehicle and leave the engine running in case they needed to make a quick getaway before exiting and slinking nimbly towards the house. At this point, Shane was apprehensive. He debated simply leaving the man behind and driving back to the city. Yet, he knew the money was going to be enough to put us over the edge, and we'd finally be able to get our house. So, he sat quietly and waited, telling himself that the man was just breaking in to steal something, or maybe take some compromising photos of someone. But, with the windows down, Shane then heard something that made his stomach drop. Several quick pops came from inside the house, and Shane looked up to see flashes of light in the upstairs window corresponding with them. Gunshots. Shane panicked. He threw on the headlights and tried to turn the car around as quickly as he could. No amount of money was worth him getting involved in whatever he was currently involved in, and he was just getting ready to punch the accelerator and fly out of the driveway when a loud bang on the passenger door made him jump. The man was wrenching the door open forcefully and dove into the seat, screaming at Shane to "Drive!" and "Get us the fuck out of here!" Seeing no other options, Shane obliged and whipped back out onto the road while the man kept yelling expletives. Shane realized that he was in severe pain, and when they passed under a street lamp, he saw that the man was clutching his stomach and his hands were covered in blood. "Fuck, motherfucker shot me. Shit, I'm losing a lot of blood. I'm not feeling too good." His voice was faltering with each word he spoke, and he suddenly slumped over against the window. Shane tried to shake him, told him to wake up, but he got no response. Not knowing what to do, he searched for the nearest hospital on his phone and followed the directions to it. He parked on the curb near the emergency entrance and dragged the man inside, announcing loudly that he'd been shot and needed help. Several doctors and nurses helped load the man onto a gurney and wheeled him back into surgery while they started asking Shane questions about him. What was his name? How old was he? How was he shot? Shane couldn't give them any answers. He was in somewhat of a state of shock, and his mind wasn't processing information quickly enough. He couldn't think of a believable reason on the spot for why he had a man that'd been shot in his vehicle, and simply opted to tell them that he didn't know and asked if he could leave. They told him that because he brought in a gunshot victim that he'd have to wait to speak with the police, and handed him off to hospital security. While he waited for the officers to arrive, he thought of calling Mr. Franks, but he couldn't get away from security to have a private conversation. So, he just sat quietly and tried to think of a good story. What he came up with was that he had been driving nearby when the man flagged him down at an intersection, and Shane had simply pulled over to help, only then to realize that the man was gravely injured. It might have been flimsy, but he didn't think they'd have any way to prove otherwise, and just hoped he'd have a chance to speak with the man before the cops did, so they could corroborate each other. However, it didn't much matter what excuse Shane came up with, as he was arrested as soon as the officers arrived, before he could even give his weak fabrication. It turned out that the house Shane and the man had gone to belonged to a detective. And it turned out that that detective had been investigating Mr. Franks for drug smuggling. Shane had unknowingly driven the man into an execution, and the execution had gone horribly wrong. The detective heard the car pull into his driveway and was armed and waiting when the man broke into his bedroom. They'd exchanged several shots with one another, and the detective had been fatally hit in the head while his wife took a round to the chest. The executioner must have thought she was dead, or was so flustered at having been shot himself that he didn't make sure she was gone before leaving the house. She'd been able to call 911 and explain what had happened before expiring herself. Given she told them that her husband managed to shoot their attacker, the police had been put on high alert for any gunshot wounds arriving at local hospitals. And when they relayed all this information to Shane as they arrested him, he broke down and confessed to the whole thing. Unfortunately for Shane, the executioner didn't make it. Shane tried to explain to the officers that he had no idea what was going to happen when he drove to the house, but they wouldn't hear any of it. Mr. Franks was arrested too, but he of course had an alibi for the night, and they couldn't find any evidence to tie him to hiring the man. What's worse, Mr. Franks tried to pin the whole thing on Shane. As Mr. Franks explained it to police, he had complained to his employee that the deceased detective had been annoying him and making his business difficult. He had no idea that Shane would try to kill him over it. The evidence showed that Shane had been driving the car, and there was nothing forensically to tie him to actually being in the house or having pulled the trigger. So, they charged him with accessory to murder. With his word against Mr. Franks and no hard evidence either way, they didn't believe they could prove that Shane had indeed planned the whole thing. But they could definitely prove that he had helped the murderer kill the detective and his wife in cold blood. They threw the book at him. We spent all the money that we had on his defense, even though he tried to tell us not to. But no matter how much we worked to argue that Shane hadn't had a clue what he was doing that night, we couldn't prove it. And the court wanted to see justice for such a heinous crime. He was given a sentence of 30 years to life and hauled off to the state penitentiary, with us barely having time to say goodbye. For the next 10 years, I visited him as often as possible, and he called me whenever they let him. Mom and I had ended up destitute again after the trial, and our hopes of moving on to better things were dashed. She fell back into her old ways, and I was left with the burden of trying to keep us both afloat. Worse than she was before, she wasn't able to hold down steady work, and I had to take on several jobs to pay our bills. No matter her faults, she was still my mother, and she had been good to me for years. I couldn't just leave her to die in squalor. Mine and Shane's dreams of me going to college once I graduated high school evaporated. Yet, Shane remained optimistic. It's one thing that never ceased to amaze me about him. All those years he spent grinding when I was younger, all throughout his trial, and even throughout his time in prison, he always kept a positive outlook, always wore a smile. Better times were just around the corner in his mind, and he continued to encourage me in every one of our conversations that we'd figure it all out someday. But I knew he was having a hard time with his sentence. He wanted desperately to get out to help me and Mom, and his living conditions were awful. He tried his best to hide it, but he looked sickly whenever I saw him, and often bore the marks of having been in fights. The little food that he did receive made him ill, and he mentioned that he sometimes had to sleep on the floor if they ran out of bunks. My brother had just been trying to make us a little extra money to improve our lives, and now he was suffering for it, and maybe would be for the rest of his life. Then, a few months ago, he called me and was far more excited to talk than usual. He told me that he'd been selected as a potential candidate for the prison's new early release program. At the time, he had 20 years left before he'd be eligible for parole, but if he agreed to participate, they'd set him free right away. As it was a new process, there'd be some additional oversight on his time outside, and if things weren't going well, he could still be brought back in. But it was a chance. "That sounds way too good to be true," I said. "What's the catch?" "Well, they said I have to undergo an experimental procedure. Called it being ethically altered. Cutting-edge science, they say though. Apparently, it removes your criminal tendencies or something, and can guarantee that you'll never commit another crime again. But the beauty is, I haven't really got any criminal tendencies in the first place, so it shouldn't do anything to me." He was speaking so quickly, I barely caught it all. I was hesitant. "I don't know, Shane. I don't like the idea of you being used like some kind of lab rat. And what do they mean, ethically altered? That sounds, I don't know. Is it like a surgery they want to do on your brain?" "Yeah, I know, it sounds a little off, but it's just a term the prison probably came up with to make it sound nice for the people outside. Anyway, they said no surgery, no drugs. They won't tell me exactly what the process is. Guess it's top secret shit, but apparently there's nothing physically invasive about it. My guess is They're gonna strap me into a chair or something and put a helmet on me that'll pulse some kind of waves through my brain and try to rewire it to be more docile. For thinking that he might undergo a procedure that would potentially alter his brain, he was sounding remarkably nonchalant. Dude, that sounds super sketchy if they won't tell you what exactly they're going to do to you. What if it fucks up your brain? What if it kills you? I was growing less convinced that this was a good idea with every word. It won't kill me. They have a guarantee of that. Yes, they said it will change me. But like I said, they were talking about removing my criminal tendencies. And you know that I'm not really a serious criminal or anything. Look, this is an opportunity for us, Jack. 10 minutes. That's how long they said the whole process takes. 10 minutes, and I'm back with you and Mom. 10 minutes, and we can get our lives back on track. I can get a job, and we can save up money again. You'll go to college. It'll be just like we planned. Mom will probably even get out of her shit spiral and start helping out again. His last few sentences made me realize that he hadn't been calling to ask for my opinion on his participation in the program. You've already signed up, haven't you? I asked him. He paused. I love you, little brother. The line went dead. I didn't hear from him again after that. He normally called once every few days, but the phone didn't ring for a week. When I got a day off work, I drove up to the prison to see him in person. But I was told that I couldn't. He was apparently sick and in the infirmary. I told him that he'd been talking about participating in the new early release program and asked if his illness was related to that. They told me that he just had the flu. However, they also said that there was no early release program that they were aware of. Leaving them with a message to have him call me as soon as he was feeling better, I went home with a pit in my stomach. Something was wrong. In all the years he'd been inside, Shane and I had never gone this long without speaking. Sure, he'd gone very sick a few times, but he'd always called before heading to the infirmary to let me know he might be out of touch for a little while. And why hadn't they known about the early release program? Were they lying? Did something go wrong with the process and they were trying to cover it up? Or had it really been so top secret that not everyone in the prison was privy to the information? In any case, I knew all I could do for the time was wait. Another week passed without a call, and I made another trip to the prison, where I received the same story. He was still sick, and I couldn't see him. I was more forceful this time, and demanded that they let me visit him in the infirmary if he was really that ill. They told me that that would be impossible. It wasn't until they threatened to escort me out physically and not allow me back for future visits that I finally capitulated and left of my own accord. After the third week with no word from Shane, I was convinced that something terrible had happened to him, and the prison was trying to hide it. I called up there so much asking for information on him or this program that they blocked my number, and I was on the brink of writing directly to the government when my phone rang. It wasn't Shane. It was someone from the prison informing me that we could come pick him up the next day. He was being released on parole. That was it. I started to try to reply with questions, but they cut me off, just saying, "He'll be available at noon," before hanging up on me. I couldn't believe it. 3 weeks of radio silence, and now, suddenly, he was getting back out. They were really letting him go. I was going to have my brother back. But any excitement of mine at having him returned was tempered with wondering what state he'd be in when we brought him home. They put him away believing that he had potentially had a large part in planning the murder of an innocent man and woman, one of them being a member of law enforcement. What had they done to him that made them so convinced he was no longer a danger to society? I only needed to wait until we picked him up the following day to understand why they weren't worried about him anymore. Shane had been right about one thing. Mom was different with the prospect of him coming home. She only had half her normal morning helping of vodka and actually ironed her clothes, although her hands were shaking so badly as she did it that it didn't help much. We even had our first real conversation in years about how things were going to be okay now that he was coming back. Yet, when we saw him, we quickly realized It wasn't going to be the homecoming we'd hoped for. Shane was different. The smile that he always wore was gone. In fact, all the life that normally filled his face seemed to be missing. He wore a vacant expression and stared into the distance, as if he recognized nothing in front of him. When I called his name, he turned to face me. But it was as if he only did it because he recognized the word Shane, and not his brother's voice. I wrapped him in a hug and asked if he was okay, told him how happy I was to see him and that he was free. He didn't hug me back. His arms lay stiff at his sides. Shane had always been a big hugger, especially with me, and I'd expected that on his first day of freedom, he'd give me a huge squeeze. I got nothing. Pulling back, I grew worried. "Shane, what the hell? Are you okay? What did they do to you?" I shook him slightly as I asked. "I feel okay," he responded, so mechanically that I could scarcely recognize his voice from the AI ones that are used for voiceovers. Just when I was about to begin screaming at the guards that were helping escort him to explain what was wrong with him, a thin, dark-haired woman in a lab coat approached us and introduced herself as Dr. Kochik, head of the new program. "Are you Shane's brother?" she asked. "He listed you as his post-release guardian." "Yeah, I am. What the fuck did you do to him?" I snapped at her. She considered me coolly. "Your brother is one of the first people to undergo a revolutionary new process that is going to change the way we handle criminal justice in this country. No longer will we need to lock away the worst members of our society forever. We'll be able to give them the alteration, and they'll be able to rejoin the rest of us. You should be proud of them," she said with an air of condescension. "That's not my brother." I didn't like her superior attitude. "Shane has never stood still more than 10 seconds in my entire life. Look at him." Shane hasn't moved an inch from where the guard was escorting him stopped him when we walked up. He looked over towards me and Dr. Kochik whenever he heard the word Shane. But then, realizing we weren't speaking directly to him, turned his head straight forward again and stared blankly into space. "You need to lower your voice." She bore an expression of annoyance. "I understand that the effects of the process may be shocking at first, but you'll see in time that he's better off this way. You have to remember that your brother committed a heinous crime and likely would have done something similar in the future had we let him out via the normal practice. In any case, the effects cannot be reversed. What we need to discuss now is the path forward." "Fuck you, lady," I was seething. "You don't know shit about him. He was innocent. He was a good man. And what do you mean the effects can be reversed? You change him back. Change him back now. I don't care if he sits in here for the rest of his life. At least he'll be himself." She was starting to mark some things off on a clipboard, and I could tell she was only half listening to me. Looking up, she began. "Again, the process is irreversible, and you'll find that your brother signed a binding agreement to participate in this trial. He's been evaluated over the last several weeks by medical staff and government officials, and everyone is on board with moving forward with Phase 2, public reintroduction. At this point, you have two options. Option 1, you can sign this, and you'll get to take your brother home. For the first month, you'll call me daily to discuss how he's doing, and we will make periodic home visits to inspect in person. We'll help him get work so he can start contributing to society again, like a law-abiding citizen. You will not disclose anything about this process to anyone, and if anyone should ask how he got out early or why he's acting so differently, you'll simply say that he's been reformed and he was released early due to good behavior and overcrowding. Any violation of these terms, and he will be brought right back here, and you will lose all future visitation privileges. Option 2, you don't sign this, and we take your brother right back inside, now, and you also lose all future visitation privileges. And before you start spouting off about legality or suing us or anything of that nature." She could see obviously the fury in my eyes. "You should know we have backing from the highest levels. Your case would go nowhere. Now, if you could hurry up and make your decision, please. I have several more of these to do today." She returned to her clipboard. I was shaking with anger. Clearly to her, Shane was nothing more than a variable in her experiment. He wasn't a person, a brother, a friend, a human at all. Just a note on her clipboard. An alteration for her to study. But what choice did I have? She had all the power and she knew it. If I fought her or refused, she'd take Shane away and I'd never see him again. And if he had been living poorly before, it would be nothing to how I imagined him living inside now, sitting on his bed day in and day out, wasting away with that blank stare on his face. Wrenching the clipboard from her hands, I signed the agreement. We rode home in near silence. Both Mom and I tried to ask Shane questions about the process he underwent, but all he could tell us was, "I don't remember." I was just about to ask him what he did remember, to see if he even really knew who we were, when he abruptly announced, "I am tired. I need sleep." Again, his voice had no emotion behind it. It sounded as if a computer was reading off lines of code. Wondering now if they had turned him into some sort of cyborg, I looked in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see red eyes staring back at me. But I was surprised to find he'd already fallen asleep. Instantly, as soon as he said it, he'd needed sleep. He went to sleep, like it was the next line in a command string. I made a plan to go over his entire body with the metal detecting wand that I had at home from one of my security jobs as soon as we got through the door. When we arrived at the apartment complex and parked the car, he was still snoring. I had to open the back door and shake him slightly to wake him. In the past, when I'd woke him from a deep slumber, he'd always been a little grumpy. It was the only time I was cautious around him. On instinct, I slightly stood back as he opened his eyes, awaiting a tirade of frustration and asking for 5 more minutes. But he just stared straight ahead. "Shane?" I said his name. He turned to look at me, but didn't reply. "Hey, we're home. You can get out of the car now, and we can go inside." I wondered how much of his behavior was due to the alteration, and how much might be due to him having been in prison for 10 years, and always having to be told what to do. Okay, his vocal cords made the sound. But it's hard to describe. It wasn't his voice. I know that doesn't make much sense. But I've heard that voice for 24 years. I know the quality, the cadence, the inflection. It just wasn't his. Mom had already given up. She'd started crying on the drive home. And the minute we parked, she'd run upstairs. I knew to go hit the bottle or maybe something stronger. Shane exited the car and I closed the door behind him. Surprisingly, he started walking towards the elevators like he knew where he was going. I decided not to say anything and see if he remembered where he lived. He hit the up button as he should have, and he selected the correct floor once he was inside. When we exited on our floor, he made a direct line for our unit. I followed him closely and watched as he opened the door, just as he had done hundreds of times before. However, he stopped right after stepping through the threshold and stood stock still again. I nearly crashed into him. He seemed to be waiting on the next set of instructions, so I told him to go sit at the kitchen table for now. "Okay," the voice came again. Just as I'd planned to do on the drive back, I ran my wand all over his body and found he had no metal inside of him. I felt his head for signs of stitching or scarring and discovered nothing. I checked every inch of exposed skin for surgical markings, but at least to my untrained eye, he was clean. The entire time I did my examination, Shane didn't move, nor did his expression change. That blank stare just fixated on the wall in front of him, and I got the expression I could do nearly anything to him, and he wouldn't respond. I sat down at the table across from him and started asking the questions that I'd wanted to ask in the car. "Hey, Shane?" His eyes met mine, and it was only then that we were sitting down, and I was looking directly into them that I truly saw that there was nothing behind him. Whatever it was that made Shane was gone. I was looking only at a collection of cells, a biological mass that could walk and talk but had no personality, had no life. It terrified me. My voice quivered as I asked, "Shane, do you remember your full name?" "Yes." What is it? Shane Theodore Thompson. It was like he was recalling data stored away in a hard drive. Do you know who I am? Yes. Who am I to you, and what is my full name? You are my brother, Jack Francis Thompson. How old are we? I am 36, and you are 24. I was happy to see that he at least knew who he was and who I was. But that was all the information they could have had him memorize at the prison. I wanted to ask something more personal to see if he really had all of Shane's memories. Who did you lose your virginity to, and where did it happen? Elise Sherman, and in her parents' basement. Now, this story was one that Shane and I had laughed about often. Elise's father had come downstairs while they were in the middle of the deed, and he chased Shane out of the house with Shane's pants around his ankles. It had woken the neighbors, and several of them got an eyeful of Shane's business while he desperately tried to pull his pants up and dive back into his car. But this time, he relayed the information with no humor, no crack of a smile, remembering the absurdity of it all. The information was there in his head, but it was as if he had no connection to it. I realized that they hadn't removed his criminal tendencies as they told him. They had removed him. I don't know how they did it, and at the time, I still wasn't sure what they had done. But I knew he wasn't there anymore. Shane's body was sitting right in front of me, but my brother had died somewhere in that prison. Over the next several weeks, I kept my agreement with Dr. Kochik. I called her daily and informed her of how things were progressing with Shane. There weren't really any changes to report. As she'd stated they would, they helped him secure a job at the local grocery store, and she checked in on him in person twice. She couldn't have been more delighted with the success of her program, if you could really call it that. I surely didn't. Yes, Shane hadn't committed any crimes and seemed highly unlikely to ever do so. But Shane also hadn't done much of anything. He was operating on what I should have called pure animal instinct, outside of being given direct instructions. When he was hungry, he ate. Thirsty, he drank. When he needed to use the restroom or sleep, he did that as well. But beyond that, I had to tell him to do everything. Shower, brush his teeth, get dressed, go to work. At the grocery store, he had to be given specific tasks by his boss, and he was able to perform them perfectly. But he took no initiative beyond doing exactly what he was told to do. And that's what it seemed our lives would be from then on. Shane had given so much of his life for me, sacrificed his entire future. I didn't mind helping him for once, and decided that I would continue to support him in this state, until the day that one of us died. But then, last week, something changed. Shane and I shared a bedroom, and I woke around 3 a.m. to an odd scratching noise. We're no strangers to rats in our building, but this was different, and it was coming from near Shane's bed. I walked over to investigate, using my cell phone light to check for vermin. I couldn't find anything. As I approached, the noise simply stopped. Too tired to care much, I went back to sleep with plans to look into it more in the morning. Yet in the morning, those plans were driven straight out of my mind. It was the smell of bacon that woke me the second time, and I opened my eyes in confusion. Mom hadn't gotten up to make breakfast in years, and Shane hadn't cooked anything since his return. He just ate pre-made meals or leftovers from the fridge. Rolling over, I saw that Shane's bed was empty, and I sat up quickly in astonishment. I'd had to tell him to get out of bed every morning since he came back. What was going on? Then, I heard it. Laughter. Shane's laughter drifted through the doorway. Him and my mom were having an animated conversation in the kitchen. I heard my name through the cackles. Bleary-eyed, I walked in to join them, and saw that Shane was at the stove, happily frying up breakfast, while Mom was at the table smiling and having a cigarette. "Speak of the devil," Mom said, and Shane spun around. He ran over to me, spatula still in hand, and wrapped me in a massive hug. Stunned, I only feebly returned it as he said, "Good morning, little brother. So glad you're awake. We were just talking about the time that you tried to make me a birthday cake, and you mixed up the salt and the sugar." He started laughing hard and pulled back. I was at a loss for words. He was acting just like his old self. Was I dreaming? As he tried to step back towards the stove, I grabbed his face with both of my hands and looked directly into his eyes. There was life there again. But still, there was something off about them. A darkness I didn't remember from before. There was a sudden flash of black, and I leapt back, gasping. "What's the matter, Jack? Still shocked at how much better looking I am than you?" He laughed some more and went back to his cooking. It was a trick of the light, I told myself. Just be happy that he's acting like himself again. Maybe after a few weeks, the effects lessen or something. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was a coldness in Shane's laughter that hadn't been there before. Whatever my reservations, we had the best family breakfast we'd had since Shane was put away. We reminisced about old times, talked about our future. I nearly cried at how happy I was to have my brother truly returned. After he left for work, I called Dr. Kochek to give my update, and I debated whether I should tell her the truth. Shane's behavioral change was positive in my view, but she might not see it the same way. Maybe she'd want to take him back and do the process over again. But the first words out of her mouth when she picked up were, "Is he acting differently today?" She sounded anxious. Her tone made me nervous. Maybe something had gone wrong with some of the other participants. Yeah, he was acting like his old self this morning. He even got up and made breakfast," I replied. "Did you notice anything strange about him?" How did she know? Nothing serious. I just thought there was some kind of, I don't know. His eyes looked different. What's going on? Shit. Just hang tight. I'll come out and check on him tomorrow. And she suddenly hung up. My heart was hammering. She knew something. She'd been expecting exactly what I told her. I tried to call her back, but it went straight to voicemail. For the rest of the day, I tried to act as normally as possible, just as she had instructed. I went to work myself, but had a hard time concentrating. I wondered how Shane would be that evening. But when he returned from his shift, he did so with a bag full of groceries in his arms and announced loudly that he was going to make us a 5-star meal. Seeing his smiling face pushed my concerns down, and I chalked Dr. Kochek's behavior up to her process possibly failing. Maybe whatever she'd done had reversed itself, and she was not in fact going to revolutionize criminal justice in this country. With that thought, I wondered if this might be the last night I'd have my brother before they hauled him back to the prison to do more tests or simply lock him away again. I decided, if that was the case, that I should stop my worrying and just enjoy the evening with my family. We ate, we drank, we laughed, we sang. It was a perfect night. Until we fell asleep. I woke again around 3 a.m. The scratching had returned, louder this time, and I looked over towards Shane's bed. "Fuck," a whisper yelled as I sat up and slid back towards the wall. Shane was sitting bolt upright in his bed, with his feet down on the floor. He was glaring at me. There was a malevolent grin on his face, illuminated by the digital clock on the nightstand. "What the fuck are you doing, man?" I yelped. There was something about his presence. It was dark and heavy. It made the air around me oppressive, and I was struggling to get full breaths in. He didn't reply, just kept watching me. His eyes were cold, and as I stared into them, I caught movement behind him. A shadow was crawling across his wall. A shadow with red eyes and long spindly hands. He opened his mouth, and voices that I did not recognize, emanated from it. Shh. Go back to sleep, little brother. There was no love behind the words. It was malice. It was evil. My eyelids sagged, and I collapsed back onto bed. I tried to fight it, but exhaustion overcame me, and I fell back into a deep sleep. The next day, I didn't wake up until noon. Shane had already left for work, and I had 6 missed calls and a flurry of texts from my manager asking why I hadn't shown up for my shift. I played the events of the night before back in my mind and tried to tell myself it was a dream, that there was no way it could be real. But when I looked over at Shane's bed, I saw there were deep gouges in the wall behind it. Gouges that looked like they'd been made by massive clawed hands. Something clicked into place. I formed a theory on what they'd done to Shane at the prison. I think they removed his soul. I don't know how they did it. I don't know if it was magic or if it was science. But I think the soul that had inhabited Shane's body, the very thing that made him who he was, has been ripped out. Dr. Kochik never showed up for her visit, and she stopped answering my calls. When I contacted the prison directly, they said Dr. Kochik had never worked there, and told me there was no record of a Shane Theodore Thompson even serving time at the facility. They've abandoned us. They're trying to cover this up. He's getting worse by the day. He can move things without touching them. I've heard him speak in languages I can't understand. I'm sure this is happening to more of them that went through the process. To more of them that they ethically altered. Because I don't think they considered that if they removed the souls that inhabited these people, they left them open to be inhabited by something else.